Hey all, back again. I am filming now the my April and May joint reading wrap up since I did not get to film those for you all, and I'm really excited to bring them to you. I have quite a few books that I read in April, not as many in May, but still a few, and so I'm gonna just go ahead and get into it. I will say a lot of these books I read on my Kindle, so I'll pop up a picture of the book as I'm talking, so just so that you know, the majority of these I read on my Kindle, so I don't have a whole lot to hold up for you all, but I think that is fine. So I'm gonna go ahead. Sorry, my book with my recording of all of my books that I've read is over here. That's why I'm looking that way. So I started out April reading a lot of Cassandra Clare. So I knew Lady Midnight was being released. When was it released? I don't know. I had it for a little while before I read it. And so I decided to go back and read City of Heavenly Fire. I have that book on my Kindle, so obviously I cannot hold it up. But I went back, read it. I loved it. I mean, it's City of Heavenly Fire. Yeah. Then I went ahead and read Tales from Shadowhunter Academy. Obviously, the bind-up hasn't been released yet, so I went ahead and read all 10 of the short stories. It was so great. It was so great. I loved learning more about the world that we had already been in. I loved watching people kind of go through the process of learning how to be a Shadowhunter, especially because even though in all the books that Cassandra Clare had released up until that point, people kind of got thrown into the Shadowhunter Academy, the Shadowhunter world. They didn't learn how to do it. They kind of flew by the seat of their pants. And so it was just really great to see. I loved seeing Clary and Jace. I love seeing Isabel just kind of take over everything in Simon's brain for a lot of the time. And it was just great. And then I went ahead and read Lady Midnight. You guys, I loved this book. I gave it a 4.75 stars, and there's a very specific reason that I didn't give it 5 stars. I know that this is a lot of what Cassandra Clare does. I am a little bit over just in general the kind of forbidden love aspect in books. It's a little bit annoying to me at this point, and I've read other books and series where that's a central main point, and it's just my own personal thing. But other than that, this book was completely a 5-star book. I loved it. I loved kind of jumping back into the world. I loved getting to, and people have said this book has been out for a while now, but I really loved getting to be in the Shadowhunter world through the point of view of someone who's known their Shadowhunter for their entire lives. Clary and Tessa had no clue about that world and had to kind of learn it. But Emma grew up in that world and she knew exactly what she wanted to do. I really was yearning for some Emma, especially after reading City of Heavenly Fire again. And so I just really enjoyed this book. It was great. It was great. So the next few books that I read in April, I read on my Kindle. And the one that I read after Lady Midnight was We Should All Be Feminist by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. And it's a short. It's based on her TED Talk that she gave, I think of the same name, basically talking about feminism, why we should all be feminists, what feminism actually means, and why it gets distorted. I loved it. I think you all know by now that I'm super, super interested in books around feminism, books around women kind of being in charge of their own lives and their own perceptions that they can put out there. And I am a woman, so I guess that makes sense. And I just really did love it. At this point, it's been so long ago that I read it and it was so short, but it was great. I loved it. The next book that I read is called Dad is Fat, and it's by Jim Gaffigan, who is a hilarious stand-up comedian. I didn't start this book in April, but I finished it in April. I started it, I think, even in 2015. It was hilarious. I will say I wanted it to be funnier than it was, but it was still really funny. So, yeah. I rated it a 3.5 stars. Oh, and I rated, I think, We Should All Be Feminist as a 4-star. And so, yeah, it was just funny. It was funny. And, you know, that's kind of about him and living with his kids. So, always a fun time. The next book I read in April is called The Dip, and it's by Seth Golden. It's also a really tiny book. I read it, actually, print book. I don't have it. I think I need to find it because I told a friend that she could borrow it. Maybe I already let her borrow it. We'll see. But it was interesting. I rated it 3.5 stars. It's a business book, but applicable to lots of different areas in life, where basically it talks about people being successful because they push through something that's called the dip. And Seth Golden's point is that the dip is a little curve down with a huge steep incline after it for any project or whatever you're working on. If you need to push through and follow the dip, that's where most people give up, basically, in the dip. And if you can push through the dip, what he says is that you'll be super successful because not many people make it past the dip. It was super repetitive, and I got some things out of it, but even though it was a tiny, tiny book, I wish I could show it to you all. It could have been even smaller, honestly. So again, I think I rated 3.5 stars. It was worth the read if you're interested in things like that. It tells you how to identify the dip, other different kinds of things that look like a dip but aren't, you know, things like that. It was good advice, but it wasn't anything earth-shattering in my opinion. So the next book that I read, I actually have it. I went ahead and finished up the series with Isla and the Happily Ever After. So you saw in my March wrap-up that I read and The French Kiss and Lola and the Boy Next Door. I went ahead and finished up with Isla and the Happily Ever After. This might have been my favorite one out of the bunch. I think I rated Anna and the French Kiss like 3.5 stars. Lola and the Boy Next Door was 4. Isla and the Happily Ever After, I'm pretty sure I rated 4.5. And like I said, they just got better and better. I really identified with Isla in this. I just like this book a lot. And so yeah, that was Isla and the Happily Ever After. Those are my thoughts. So the next 2 books I read, you probably have seen me haul, or I have hauled. I don't want to assume that you've watched that video, but they were Etiquette and Espionage and Curtsies and Conspiracy by Gail Carriger. I will be finishing the series, but I rated both of these 3.5 stars. Again, 3.5 stars isn't bad. I enjoyed them. It took me a while to get into the first book. Etiquette and Espionage. It just took me a while. They're steampunk. I know a lot of people who like the steampunk genre, and I don't hate it, but I don't think it's particularly my cup of tea. But I really did enjoy these books. The story is basically about young girls who are in a finishing school where they're, of course, learning everything you learn in a finishing school, but they're also learning how to be spies and assassins. It's hilarious at times. Again, I feel like it's slow moving at times. Curtsies and Conspiracies was a little bit easier just because I had already gotten into the story, but even this started out a little bit slower and I was wondering if I was going to even finish, but I am. So hopefully soon you will see me wrapping up Waistcoats and Weaponry. The next book that I read in April also was read on my Kindle, and it was Modern Romance by Aziz Ansari. I rated it 4 stars. I really like the book. I really like the book. I love Aziz Ansari. I think he's hilarious. He is super clever and like just really observant and can give that to you in a hilarious way. So Modern Romance is a nonfiction book. It's actually about dating and romance and relationships in the age of technology. So when you have all these dating apps, when you are texting more than you're calling, all of these different things, how does that affect the way that people connect? And I feel like you hear a lot of talk about that, and my friends and I discuss it all the time. But not only how do you connect, but how do you connect specifically when you're trying to build this intimate relationship with someone, and trying to find someone even to build that relationship with. It's super funny again, but it's also well researched. So he is a comedian, Aziz is, and he teamed up with some sociologists to do this study. He had like focus groups and, Reddits and lots of different things that kind of informed how he presented the information. I really liked it. Again, I gave it 4 stars. I would definitely suggest it if that topic is interesting to you, or if you just never really thought about it. I think it's a great book to kind of spark some thoughts in your head about the way we communicate with each other, and especially when we're trying to build that kind of relationship with other people. The next book I read was also on my Kindle, and it was Is Everyone Hanging Out Without Me and Other Concerns by Mindy Kaling. I gave that book a 3.5 stars, a 3.5 star rating. I like Mindy Kaling, and coming from Aziz Ansari's book, I kind of wanted to follow along in that comedian book, vein that I was in, especially since I had already read Dad is Fat, or finished it rather, earlier in the month. I liked it. Again, I gave it 3.5 stars, but it wasn't as funny as I thought it would be. There were a lot of like random things in it, and I think that a lot of the times, especially with comedy is not super definable, at least in my opinion. So what one person thinks is funny, somebody else won't. And I think there was just a lot of that. A lot of Mindy Kaling thinks that this is funny and I don't, but that's not an indictment on Mindy Kaling. Like, it's funny to her, and great, and I'm sure it's funny to other people. Just some parts of it fell short for me, but I did like the majority of the book, and so I went ahead with that 3.5 star rating. So the last book that I read in April, it was a long time coming, and I will go ahead and say that book was Illuminated by Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff. Okay, y'all, it took me a while to get into this book. I was really excited about the way it was written, in case files and instant messages, all that. I'm sure a lot of us have heard a lot about this book. It took me a while to get into it, though, even though I was excited about that format. Something about the format didn't really work for me in the beginning, and I also kind of felt like Katie and Ezra's voices in the beginning were super similar, and they also switched back and forth between their interviews without a lot of notice that that's what they were doing. And so it made it difficult to get into. But when I tell you I got into this book, it was just so good. And I'm not going to spoil it. There's a part of this book that, or there's an aspect of this book that I don't typically like in books. And I wish I could say what it was, but I don't want to. Oh, that's weird. You can see my reflection in the book. That's so strange. Okay, anyway. That's distracting me. But there's an aspect of this book that I don't typically like in books. And if I had known it was in here, I probably would have given up, especially what with how it just took me a long time to get into it. But I'm really happy I pushed through. I'm really happy I like it. Oh, I love it. And I heard that Gemini which is the sequel to this book, or the second in the trilogy, I think. Like, you hear about Katie and Ezra, but they're not the central couple, and that just makes me really sad, because I need to know. I need to know how this ends for them. But either way, I'm super excited and for the next book, and I love this. I rated it 4 stars. So yeah, it was great. It was just great. So those are the books that I read in April. Now I'll talk about the books I read in May, which were significantly less. This video is already super long, so I'm going to try and make this brief. So the first book that I read in May was Lily and the Octopus. I think I talked about this before on this channel. This was an ARC. I received it in February. It came out a few weeks ago on June 7th. And so I went ahead and read it in May so that I could have a review up on Goodreads in time for release. I gave this book 3.5 stars. It was pretty interesting. It took me so long to get into it. At one point I was just reading it because I you know, I got it for free, and you don't have to do a review, but I wanted to be able to do one. And so legit for the first 2/3 of the book, I was like, oh, why am I reading this? The book is about a guy named Ted or Ed, I can't remember exactly, and his dog Lily. I would say for that first 2/3 of the book, Ted fell completely flat for me. He was so one-dimensional, or two-dimensional, I guess. I just couldn't relate. I couldn't understand him. I just didn't get it. And then, like I said, the last third-ish of the book kind of redeemed it for me. The next book that I read in May was Things No One Will Tell Fat Girls by Jess Baker. And the tagline is a handbook for unapologetic living. So I really enjoyed this book. I gave it 4 stars. This is a book about body positivity, and it's about being happy with who you are, regardless of where you are in your journey. So even if you are someone who's trying to lose a lot of weight or gain a lot of weight, or whatever the case may be, you don't like your arms, you don't like your whatever, even if you're working to change that, even if you're trying to be a healthier person, or more importantly, even if you're not, being happy with who you are and not letting anyone take that joy from you because of who they think you should be, or how they think you should feel about their body, or, you know, anything like that. I really loved it. Jess Baker is also a blogger for the body positivity movement, and I really appreciated it. The other thing that I really appreciated about this book was that Jess Baker, she has a certain voice, and she uses it really well and really effectively, but she also understands that she's one person that does not have all the diverse perspectives that you can have on this topic. And so after every chapter where she's kind of introducing a concept and talking about it in her own terms, etc., she also has guest essayists come in to talk about that concept or topic or whatever from their point of view. So Jess Baker is a white woman, I believe, yes, and so she may introduce a topic and then have a trans woman come and write an essay about their experience with that topic, or she might have an African American woman come in and talk about their experience, or whatever, a woman living with a disability. I'm trying to be very intentional about my language lately. A woman living with a disability, she might invite them to come in and express their view on the topic that she has brought up. And so I just really appreciated that kind of a wealth of perspective, and also you get introduced to a lot of people that you may not know about because they're guest essayists for this book. So the next book that I read in May is called 3 Wishes, and it is by Liane Moriarty, who I love. I love her writing. I will say this book is probably the only one so far that I've given less than a 4-star rating. I gave it a 3.5-star rating. It was really interesting. It's about 3 triplets. 2 of them are identical. 1 does not look like the other 2. And it's just super interesting. They're sisters. They're close. They have that triplet bond. They're in each other's lives and businesses. Not they're like actual businesses, but like I'm in your business type. I'm in your business. And it's just so interesting to see them, but then to also see them kind of the way the rest of the world sees them. There is a sort of, it's not a mystery. Liane Moriarty typically writes mysteries. This is kind of like a dramatic irony thing where the audience knows something and the sisters are working to figure it out. And I think I figured it out early, but it was kind of obvious to me. But it was just hilarious and kind of heartbreaking to watch them go through all of that and figure out things. I don't want to spoil anything, but it was a really good book. I love Liane Moriarty. I would recommend any of her books. I gave this one a 3.5-star rating, and yeah, it was great. The next book that I read was actually a set of 4 novellas. It's called Hansel, and it's by Ella James. So I talked about an Ella James book a while ago. It was called Sloth. And I really loved it. I gave that 5 stars. I gave Hansel as a whole 4 stars. So Hansel is about a girl who was kidnapped when she was younger. I think she's also a triplet. She was a triplet because I remember thinking it's really weird that I went from reading one book about triplets to a completely different book about triplets. she's a triplet, but she was kidnapped when she was younger. She was taken to this house. The mother, the woman who kidnapped her, was obsessed with kind of finding characters from fairy tales. So she was a Gretel. There was a Hansel there, hence the name of the book. They also had like a Snow White, a Little Boy Blue, things like that. But this story had a lot of sex in it, and it wasn't the focal point of the story, but it was used as a vehicle to kind of explain certain relationships and certain bonds. I really enjoyed the novellas. Like I said, I gave them 4 stars. It was a very dark book, or set of novellas, whatever. But I did enjoy it. I enjoyed it a lot. So yeah, that was Hansel, and that was by Ella James. So the next book that I read in May was called The Hypnotist Love Story, and it was also by Leanne Moriarty. And now that I think about it, this is the book I gave 3.5 stars. I gave 3 Wishes 4 stars. I gave The Hypnotist Love Story 3.5 stars. There was something a little bit lacking in it for me, but it was still super interesting. It was about a hypnotist who had fallen in love with this guy. But the hypnotist, she was not a hypnotist, she's a hypnotherapist. So she used hypnotism as therapy for her clients. And so basically one of her clients, let me start over. The guy that she's in love with has a stalker, his ex-girlfriend. You come to find out his ex-girlfriend is one of her clients. So you're trying to figure out which one, and also trying to figure out what happened and all of that good stuff. And it was just really well done. I really liked it. I enjoyed it. But there was just something about it. I gave it 3.5 stars. And again, that's not a bad rating, but it is what it is. So the next 2 books that I read, or the last 2 books actually that I read in May, were Starcrossed and Dreamless, both by Josephine Angelini. If you don't remember, Josephine Angelini wrote Trial by Fire, which I absolutely loved. I really liked this story, or those 2 books. It's a trilogy, and so I did finish the 3rd book in June, though, so it'll be in my June wrap-up. But I really liked those 2 books. I didn't like them as much as Trial by Fire. I gave Starcrossed a 4-star rating and Dreamless 3.5 stars, but I really liked them. And this is one of those series where I was talking about at the beginning of the book, or sorry, of this video, that has a little bit of a forbidden love type of aspect to it, and it just dragged on for so long, and it made me so upset. And I think that's why the 2nd book has a 3.5 star rating, because it just went on for too long, in my opinion. And so yeah, that's that. So those are the books that I read in April and May. This video is super long, and I'm wordy, I ramble talking about I don't know how many books I just talked about, but hopefully you enjoyed it. Please let me know if you've read any of these books, what you thought about them, if any of this sparks your interest in any of these books. I would love to hear it. Again, thank you so much for being with me. Thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing if you have. Thank you for liking the video if you have, or if you want to, or if you do, or you will, or whatever. Take life as it is. That being said, thank you for being here. Have a great, again, insert time, length of time here, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye.